Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 4 live stream for this year's Masters. Gonna go through everything you need to know, whether it's the weather, course conditions for tomorrow, DFS strategy, lineup construction for Showdown, or towards the end, some prop analysis for Underdog and Prize Picks. We're going to have you covered across the board. So sit back, enjoy yourselves. Hopefully you're having a fantastic Saturday evening and are ready to dive into some golf. If you see me looking to the side, it's because I got the UFC fights on over there. I've got quite a sweat going on out there for the large field GPPs. I've got all of the top scorers except for that Kayla Harrison chick. And she might not even be optimal. So we could be on to something over there on the MMA DFS side. And welcome on into the live stream. We have a Ship It Nation member down there. Welcome on in. We got Barry, Anthony, Trent. Welcome on in, guys. Michael, Sean, and Jake as well. Hopefully you guys are having a swell, I was going to say start to your weekend, but I guess middle of the weekend, right, out here on a Saturday. In terms of course conditions, they played, I would say, pretty much like we expected, right? We didn't think there was going to be a massive difference between the AM and PM, at least when it came to the scoring average. But in terms of course conditions, though the AM, quote unquote, played harder, right? About 0.3 shots harder than the PM. That's not really indicative of the course conditions, right? If you take a look at the scoring from today, some of the top guys came from the morning wave. You had guys like Chris Kirk that went off early that played well. Sure, guys like Morikawa Aberg had ceiling performances later on. But outside of that, right, guys like Xander were a mid-tee time. Guys like Patrick Cantlay went off early. Same thing with guys like an Adam Scott there. Even guys like a Rory, Joaquin Niemann, Fowler, Matsuyama were all up there in the top 10 DK scores. So if you played some of the early guys because of that weather edge, it probably worked out pretty well. In fact, some of the guys we talked up yesterday, right, made it up there into that top 10. But as per usual, right, some of those PM guys that are in form do sneak into your optimal lineup. So the guys that I was taking towards the top were like a Neiman, Cam Young, Cam Smith. All of them had respectable days, right? Even par or better, pretty much across the board. But I wish it would have been like a Morikawa, an Aberg that ended up taking. So obviously, you're not always going to pick the right chalk up top, but our pivots, our mid-tier plays, absolutely smacked for today. So it ended up being a slightly profitable day. Again, it would have been a lot better if I could have hit on guys like a Morikawa or an Aberg, but you can't smash for every single slate, right? We just try and set it up as best as we can, try and make sure that we're utilizing the proper strategy. And based on the conditions that we saw, which again, I think if you just look at the scoring averages, it might be a little bit misleading, worked out rather well for us. So obviously Chris Kirk was the absolute nuts today, not somebody that I played myself, but if you were looking at that weather advantage, would have been a real easy guy to get to, right? He started at +5, ended up shooting -4, which is beyond impressive on this sort of golf course. So, yeah, great to see out there for any weather truthers that were playing that yesterday. In terms of what we're going to see for Sunday, it looks like it's going to be as calm as we've gone all week. In the morning, you have next to no wind. In fact, until right about noon, you have lower than 6 miles an hour of sustained winds. And in the afternoon, though it does kick up a little bit, it's not like it gets overly nasty. I'm talking 9, maybe 10 miles an hour of sustained winds. Your wind gusts are closer to like 10 to 15 miles an hour. So certainly kicking up, right, compared to the non-existent wind out there towards the beginning of the day, but not enough where we can only take AM golfers. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about the Showdown strategy here in a second, but with placement points, we're going to have to consider guys towards the top of this leaderboard. And with the weather conditions not being that nasty later on, I think we're going to see a similar kind of situation, right? Where technically the morning scoring average might actually be harder than what we get in the afternoon. But in reality, the conditions earlier are going to be easier, right? I mean, especially if you're taking guys that are starting at like 9, 10 a.m. when course conditions have heated up a little bit, right? It's not the guys out there in dead last over the first 3 days. If you're teeing off at like 9:30, 10 a.m., that is going to be the absolute nuts. The conditions should be perfect. It'll be warm enough for the ball to fly, and you'll be finishing your round by like maybe 1:30, 2 p.m., where the winds are just starting to kick up. So we're still going to have to take guys towards the top, right? I mentioned to that, this chalky top of the leaderboard guys are going to be important for Sunday Showdown, but your early chasers, which sometimes are pretty hard to get to, right? When we have all these placement points, sometimes it'll be some chalk and then some mid-tier guys that you'll want to mix in. Because of the weather advantage, because they're going to be playing in next to no wind out there, there's a little bit more incentive to taking some of those chasers. So I'm not saying to take 4 chasers in your lineups. That would be way too much out there for your round 4 showdown, but 1 or 2 of them, maybe even 3 chasers out there in a GPP lineup might be the way to go, right? With the sort of course conditions that we're expected to see. One thing to note is that placement points are a lot more important when scoring gets difficult. And obviously with a 2 over par scoring average, it was 3 over par over there yesterday. Placement points are going to matter out there for Sunday. So this weather advantage is important. We're going to have to factor it in, but the placement points up top are also going to be extremely important. So Sunday Showdown is a little bit of a confusing mess because of all those factors that we have to look at. But luckily, we've got it all figured out, right? We have a slate plan out there for Sunday. And speaking of, let's go ahead and hop on into that. So in terms of our Sunday strategy, it's not quite the same, right, as what we have for Thursday through Saturday. With the placement points added, I'm taking a lot more chalk for my Sunday lineups. And a lot of that chalk is going to come up top. So in terms of the chalky plays that I'm taking, I'll just point them out right now. These aren't the only guys that I'm taking with ownership, but these are the ones that we're going to talk about here in live stream. So it's Scotty Scheffler at like 50%, Max Homa, Ludwig Aberg, close to 30% on Homa. I think in single entries, it'll probably be like 30 to 35%. Aberg, I got him at about 24% ownership. Again, in single entries, he'll probably be closer to 30% himself. And then outside of that, no one else that we're going to talk up as chalk. So if I'm going to take a high-owned player, right, somebody to try and lock in placement points, it's going to be on a stud like Scotty, right? It's going to be on somebody that has a real good chance, right, of holding on to their position. A Max Homa, a Ludwig Aberg that have been towards the top pretty much all week are the sort of players that I'll be locking in. And on the flip side, right, you have some of these chalky guys that we're getting to. Well, you can't forget about the Rorys of the world, right? Your lower owned plays that might go out there and spike a performance when conditions are a little bit calmer. You have guys like Rory I'm mixing in, Tony Finau, right, at low ownership. We're going to go tier by tier and expand on these plays, but it's about getting the right mix of placement points towards the top with chasers to go out there and boot. So just as a general guideline, I think you need at least 3 players that finish in the top 10 for tomorrow. Now that can range right from slate to slate, but based on the placement points, the conditions that we're going to see, my target is at least 3 players towards the top that I'm jamming into lineups, if not closer to 4, maybe even 5 players starting towards the top. So it's going to lead to a slightly more chalky setup, which is why being intentional about mixing in a lower owned pivot like Rory is going to be huge for me to going out there and getting leverage. So for example, right, if I'm starting a lineup and I know that some of my stands up top have to be like a Max Homa, a Ludwig Aberg, well, you know, I could take Scotty, right? That'd be a little bit expensive, right, to take those 3 players. But the other thing we could do here, right, is save a little bit of salary and then take one of our pivots up top. So it's all about building lineups by hand. That's what I do for Sunday. I do not use an optimizer when building lineups by hand and just being intentional about where you're getting different. So lineup construction is going to be a huge talking point that we go through after we go through these players. But that is the general slate plan out there for tomorrow. Round 4, here we come. That is right. I like that little core. You got Scheffler, Xander, Aberg, then 3 6Ks. It's aggressive, but I like it. That's for sure. What's going on, Bruce? What's going on, Zerka? Bleedo down there. Steven, we got Anthony down there too. What is going on, guys? We got Ross who says, watch yesterday's after the live. So that's okay, right? I love all the boys that are watching it over there on replay. And you said solid stuff. Appreciate that, man. Hopefully you're having a solid Saturday. Scotty's magic putter goes missing tomorrow. Wouldn't surprise me, but he might not need the putter to go out there and succeed, right? Maybe he just tee to greens this to death. So yeah, definitely possible, but it might not matter. How does round 3, round 4 showdown strategies differ from weekend DFS? So weekend DFS is like a normal showdown slate, right? It's just a little bit longer, right? You have 36 holes to work with. Round 4 showdown is a lot different from round 3, right? Round 3, no placement. It's just like the weekend slate. Round 4 is where things get a little bit different. So hopefully that answers your question. I just talked about it quite a bit, but if you have any questions, just let me know. I'll go ahead and expand on it for you. Yeti full of Crown and Coke, ready to go. Cheers, Luke. Cheers to you. I got one here too. So I'm right there with you, boss. Cam Smith bogeying in the last hole to lose a bogey free wasn't great. Yeah, that wasn't great too. There were a few guys that actually lost their bogey free round on the last hole. And I think the most impressive that kept it was Xander, right, who made that par out there. That was crazy. Today sucked. Got to bounce back. Sucked for you. Didn't suck for me. Who is the bounce back candidate? Well, I don't know off the top of my head, so we'll get back to that, man. Again, I like to think about that before I go through it. How do I like Jake Knapp at $6,300? Well, I think that he's in really poor form, but if you're just going to take a pure shot on the talent, at least he's teeing off early, right? So the only thing I can really say about Knapp that's positive is that he has an early tee time and that he's going to have the best conditions. So other than that, not playing very well. How low is too low? +4, +5. There's no such thing as too low. You can take guys like Jake Knapp, for example, right? He's not my favorite play, but you could take a guy like Jake Knapp and just hope that the placement points don't matter, right? Just hope he goes out there and makes like 5-6 birdies. In the 6K range, if you have a guy that makes 5+ birdies, that is almost for sure going to be optimal tomorrow. So I would say that there's really no too low to go. I'm never someone that does that. I don't ever limit my player pool, whether it's round 3 showdown, round 4 showdown, based on the score. Because there's a time and place for everyone, right? There are guys that are starting super early that'll have the best possible conditions that at the same time are going to be unowned, right? Like those guys that are +12, like a Jake Knapp, for example, are sub 1% owned. I mean, there's a lot of utility, right, in taking a player like that. So yeah, no one's too low. That's what I'll say. Did I see the blow up from Haddon today? Unbelievable hook. Yeah, you sent that to me, T20. So obviously I saw it. You know that, man. And yeah, he 4-putted for you from like 4 feet or something like that, and you just needed him to make that putt to cover. That is insane. It's not much fun, not fun watching Tiger break down. Yeah, I didn't watch a lot of them. I was watching the main broadcast a lot, some of like the hole by hole stuff. What I saw from Tiger was real rough. So yeah, definitely true there. Thanks for the great information. Good luck tomorrow. Absolutely, Joanne. So let's talk through some of the plays up here. So we're going to go tier by tier, talk through some of the chalk up here, some of the lower owned pivots, and up top, the chalk is really Scotty Scheffler and then everyone else that's in the top 5, top 10. So Scotty's in a tier of his own. He's obviously going to be your highest owned player. And depending on the contest that you're entering, here, 1 second, boys. I'm still sick if you guys can't tell. So I'm trying to battle through it, bring you guys the content to the best of my ability. But my apologies if I have to mute the mic a little bit and cough so it doesn't blow out your eardrums. But Scotty Scheffler at like 50% is going to be a huge talking point, right? He's by far the highest owned player, and there's a good argument to be made to just lock him out there for tomorrow. Now, I'm not locking him. I'm playing him in like 60-65% of my lineups, which depending on the GPP you're entering might actually be matching the field, because in some of your higher dollar stuff, he might be 60-65% owned. So I'm probably just taking a non-stance on Scotty Scheffler because as -7 world #1 player with placement points actually mattering, it makes a lot of sense to play Scotty right now. If you want to be bold, you can totally fade him for tomorrow, right? It doesn't mean that you have to play Scotty Scheffler tomorrow. I'm not taking that risk, right? I'm going to differentiate in other spots. But if you do want to take a stance against the field, especially in like single entries, there's going to be a ton of leverage in doing so. So, just because I'm playing Scotty doesn't mean that you have to. If you think that putter wears off, then hey, maybe fading him is a good choice. The ball striking today was a little bit hairy. Hole #1, right, he birdied, but he ended up missing the green by like 40 yards. He also had quite a few saves today from like that 8 to 10 foot range. And if he doesn't make those putts or doesn't chip in, right, like he had on hole #1, this round of this tournament would look a whole lot different. So obviously you'd be betting against world #1, which is something that I'm not going to do for Sunday. And honestly, I was going through my player pool. I decided on Scotty Scheffler last. If I had enough pivots to take, enough guys that I liked for, lower owned plays, like kind of like a Rory McIlroy, or kind of like, Tony Finau, Sahith Theegala, who we're going to talk about here in a bit. If I had enough of those guys, I could afford to take Scotty Scheffler, right? But if I was going through my player pool selecting guys and I didn't have enough pivots, he was going to be somebody that I left out of my player pool. So my advice with Scotty, if you're playing 20, maybe just 40 lineups, commit to them or completely fade them, right? If you're only going to play like a small amount of lineups, you should either be playing 100% of Scotty or probably 0%. Now, if you're doing a 150 max, like somebody like myself, that's where you can kind of take a step back, right? Potentially end up matching the field. But the smaller amount of exposure that you have, right? The less amount of lineups that you're working with, the more aggressive that I would be with Scotty. So that's what I'll say about it, right? Get your leverage in one direction or the other, unless you have enough lineups to work with where that doesn't matter nearly as much. Rory McIlroy always finishes top 5, top 10 here. So this is the narrative that we talked about today. Obviously didn't have an amazing round, but -1 is far from a terrible one. He also made 3 birdies on the day, 2 bogeys. So the fantasy score was, I'd say, above average at the very best. But for Sunday, this is really where he usually makes his mark. So I'm playing him in a few lineups where I'm not going to have Scotty Scheffler. And because I'm taking him in like 65%, I might have 35 to even like 40-45% Rory. There's probably going to be a few lineups where I try and squeeze Scotty and Rory into the same build. But the ones that I'm just starting with Rory McIlroy, I can afford to take a lot more chalk towards the bottom. So, if I'm starting with the Rory, I don't have issues taking these guys that are like 20% owned here, or even maybe indulging on a piece of chalk here towards the top end of the sevens. You have guys like Hogard that are 25%, Cam Davis, Benny Ann that are 24% ownership. And if I'm starting with a pivot up top, not Scotty Scheffler, essentially anyone but Scotty, I think you could take this strategy. You can try and squeeze in an extra one of those guys up top. So I've got this UFC fight on over here on the side. Let me actually refresh it. I think it stopped loading there, so I want to get the live stuff. It's Yuri Prohaska fighting Alexander Rakic, and I need Prohaska to pull this one out. He's the one I have in some of my top lineups. So I can't tell what's happening is round 2. If anyone's actually watching the fight and can give me an update on who's winning, that would be sick. Sorry to get a little bit distracted. Hey, the UFC fights are going on. I got to pay attention to them. You feel like everyone's going to pick Phil Mickelson since he shot 8 under in the final round. So you think you want to stay away from him. What do I think? Well, I'm playing him. So maybe I'm a sucker, right, for trying to tail that from last year. But I got his ownership at a reasonable spot. So 8.8% is definitely higher than the guys around him. So your intuition, at least if my projections are accurate, which, I would hope so, right, out there for Sunday. If they're accurate, he is getting some steam, right? He's higher owned than some of the other guys around him, but he's not like the 20% of an Adam Schenk, right? Like Chris Kirk, I got it 15.4%. Oh, it looks like Prohaska's going to win. Oh, I mushed him, didn't I? Yeah, okay, so no finish. But look, yeah, he's beating the shit out of Rakic right now. The point being, right, that guys like Kirk and Schenk, right, are much higher owned than Phil. So if you're worried about the ownership, right, these are the guys that you should worry about, right, if you're worried about the game theory side. But yeah, you're right. Phil is getting some steam. That is a sharp take there. Of course, I got you. More game theory questions, but how much money would you advise leaving on the table? You feel like there's going to be very concentrated ownership. There is, right? So if you are taking a more chalky stance, let's go. Prohaska won. Sorry. That's big for my lives. Again, I got quite a big sweat going on for MMA right now. We're winning a lot of money, so I want to keep it that way. Let's get back to your question, though. You feel like you should leave some salary on the table? I think that's a good way to do that. You can leave a little bit of salary on the table, take some chalky players, and maybe instead of taking 3 pivots, you can afford to only take 2 in a lineup. And if you're leaving $500 on the table, that's probably enough differentiation right there. So I wouldn't go crazy with it. I wouldn't be leaving a couple thousand on the table, but I think $500, something around there, would probably help you out a lot. Yuri's insane. Yeah, he is. His ownership was surprisingly a lot lower than I thought. He came in like 30%. I thought he'd be 50%. So I went heavy on him. I took 70% Yuri, right? Because I thought he'd be chalk, and he came in like half that. So it was pretty good. Rakic so far, but Yuri's given him. Yeah, Yuri won. There we go. The KO finish is great too. It's a round 2 finish, so we don't get 100 points for it. But whatever it is, I think it's like 70 or 80 points you get for the second round finish. We'll take that all day, huh? All right, let's get back into these tiers. So up top, you guys know my thoughts, right? If you're going to take Scotty, especially if you're only entering a few lineups, commit to him, right? Outside of that, I think it's wide open. Guys like Max Homa, Aberg are guys that I think are contenders to hold on to their spot. I don't think it's much of a hot take to say that guys like Homa, Aberg, right, are some of the better players in this field. And in terms of your contenders, right, I would rather have these proven guys that are tour winners, right? Even Aberg, right, won RSM Classic, right? So he's already proven that, as opposed to like your Benny Anns, opposed to some of your scrubs that are down there in the top 5, top 10. So like, just to give you an example, right, like Lucas Glover's pretty damn chalky, right, heading into Sunday, and he's only even par, right? Like that's just because of his leaderboard position. And guys like Benny Ann, right, at like 24% ownership, Cam Davis, right, 25%, even like Nikolai Hogard at 25% ownership. I don't like taking those sort of players Sunday at a major, right? Like they haven't been here before, right? None of those players I just listed off, right? Other than Lucas Glover, who of course major champion. So we can't say that about Lucas down there. But all the other guys here like Benny Ann, Cam Davis, Nikolai Hogard, it's the first time ever touching contention in a major championship. I don't expect it to go well. You're going to have some Sunday moving day pins. So the guys I'll trust, and I know Max Homa, terrible major championship record. Aberg, no major championship record. They're just better players. They're the elite tier players that, in my opinion, my projections are just more likely to hold on to their spots. Does that mean that they're going to be optimal? Absolutely not, right? But just personally, I trust those elite tier players a little bit more. So I am indulging on some chalk here from Cam Young down to Morikawa. You also have some ownership there too. I'm playing one of those 3 guys, but like Morikawa, right, at 26%. Unless you love him for Sunday, you probably want to stay away from him. And I'm 99% 99% sure I'm fading him, but let me double check on that just to make sure I'm not giving you wrong information. Yeah, I'm not playing Morikawa at all out there for Sunday. And a lot of it's because he chokes, right? He's the kind of player that I don't like trusting on Sunday. I thought I might be taking him in a few builds just in case, right? Because he's there at -6. But you have to try and find spots to get leverage, right? Whether it's fading some of the 7K chalk, that's what I'm going to do right out there for Sunday, or even mixing in a fade like Colin Morikawa. And if you're really bold about it, a Scotty Scheffler. So just make sure you're picking your spots where you're going to get that leverage to the field and mix in some pivots. In terms of pivots, we're going to talk about a bunch of them right now. So up top, I'm only taking a few, right? Rory is one of those few pivots I'm taking in the 9K plus range, but 8K and below, there are a ton that I'm willing to get to. So Tony Finau, Sahith are going to have relatively early tee times, teeing off a little bit later into the tee times, which I actually think is advantageous, right? I mentioned that it's going to be a little bit cold for the first hour and a half, 2 hours of play. So guys that are down there, 11, 12 over par are going to be playing in, I think, slightly harder conditions. They're also the worst form players. But guys like Finau, Thigala, right? They're not playing horribly to this stage. They're just not playing well over the first three. They're at a spot where the tee time is going to be perfect and they're being completely slept on. Guys like Finau, right? 5%, a 4% ounce to hit the gala. And sure, they don't have as much placement point potential as somebody like maybe, Matt Fitzpatrick, a Pavon even over there at +1. But those placement points that they're going to get, which, even if Pavon or Fitz, right, were to get into the top 10, is only a couple placement points, right, that they're going to be earning there. All Sahith has to do is make one more birdie than them. Right. I think a lot of people forget that when it comes to Sunday Showdown, right? Like, sure, if Homa and Aberg shoot like -2 and make 4 birdies, they're going to have them, right? But the placement points with those birdie points, they're going to make the optimal lineup. Down here, though, if like, for example, a Nikolai Højgaard, a Fitz, right, were to shoot like -1 with only like a couple birdies, or like 2 birdies and a bogey on the day, something like that, all that Tony Finau has to do is make like 4 birdies. And he's automatically in the optimal, right? He might make like 4 bogeys on the day, right? Shoot even or maybe 1 over par. But because he's putting up more of that birdie production, he could easily outscore, right? Some of those guys that you think are quote unquote safe because they have those placement points. So that's always my pushback with Sunday Showdown. And a lot of people will say like, oh, there's no edge to Sunday, right? Like, oh, you just got to play all this chalk. It's so hard to get leverage to the field. Not really. Right? Like, you're always going to have these guys that are going off early, a few of them that end up absolutely smashing. So it's hard to find the right guy. That's the hard part about Sunday. That's why it's not just handing out cash, right? Going out there and using game theory. You got to find the right sort of player. So obviously, right, Tony Finau, Sahith are very aggressive, high birdie percentage players and are just elite tier players, right? If they're not elite tier, they're at least above average players in this kind of field and could obviously have a ceiling round. They could obviously have a stinker round, but ceiling rounds are well within their range of outcomes. Guys like Patrick Reed are getting a little bit of ownership, right? Because he's +1, he's up there in the top 20, but at 14.5%, if there's a guy I'm going to trust, right, at slightly higher ownership, I'd rather have a Patrick Reed who's won this event before, has multiple top 10s, in fact, 4 top 10s out of his last 6 starts here, as opposed to a Benny Yan who has almost no course history, right? Like, they're on the same tier of player, right? They're that pretty much the same sort of guy. One has lower ownership, elite tier course history. The other one, it's like his first time in contention at a major, right? So which one do I trust more, the major champion or the new guy on the block? Obviously, it should be the guy who's the major champion. So that's the way that I'm handling some of my leverage. Akshay Bhatia, right? Obviously 1 week off of a win, a player that I really think fits this golf course. Not chalky because of his score, perfect tee time, right out there in the middle of the morning wave, and only 8.3% owned. In terms of 6K options, I'm not playing a bunch of 6K guys. I have to have a few of them if I want to go to like a Rory Scotty lineup, or if I really want to go with that double spend up. But we have JT Poston as an option. He's got an early tee time, not playing well. So you're taking a shot on him for sure. But, I think there's worse players to take a shot on than JT Poston, a guy that can get nuclear hot with the flat stick. And then Phil Mickelson, I know somebody mentioned him before, right? It's kind of like the Patrick Reed idea, right? He's unowned. He's actually even more unowned, right, than Patrick Reed because of the leaderboard position. And then, of course, Phil Mickelson, winner at this event multiple times, a multiple-time major champion. And last year, nuked out there on Sunday. So yeah, I do think people are going to remember that, right? Myself included, and go out there and play them, but it's not enough to make them that super chalky guy like an Adam Schenk or Chris Kirk. So that's what I'll say about the ownership pool, some of the different tiers down here. In the 6K range, maybe Adam Schenk has a great day and shoots -3, -4, and finishes in the top 5, but I'll take my chances that he doesn't, right? Like, I'll take my chances that Chris Kirk doesn't completely nuke out there for Sunday when they're 5, 6, sometimes even 7 times higher owned than the guys around them, right? And just to give you an example, I guess, like Keegan Bradley, Ricky, like, I know they're not playing amazing. They got early tee times. I'd rather even have them, right, than some of these like 20% owned players. So you chalk down low, I think, is especially egregious. Say the same thing about like Lucas Glover, guys like Sepp Straka. Like, give me these pivots all day, right? It's not just JT Poston. Let's see, like Jason Day, right? Jason Day is super cheap. He's only $7,100. I know, not playing great. He's +8. He does get an early tee time because of that. He's only 7% owned. He's half the ownership of a Sepp. He's a third of the ownership of Lucas Glover. And those placement points aren't going to make them 3 times more likely to be optimal. So just remember that those top 20 placement points are worth next to nothing. It's less than half a birdie. And unless you're finishing in the top 5, you're not really getting any substantial boost when it comes to your score. You're going to have the nuts to win in Showdown. So at least a large field GPP. So, keep that in mind. But especially in single entry, smaller field stuff, I think that people way overvalue the placement points and don't value game theory enough, and don't just value the quality of player enough, right? Like, people will rationalize playing a 20% owned Lucas Glover. Like, we got him at sub 5% the last 2 rounds. We took him in Showdown at a no ownership, right? Now he's 20%. Adam Schenk was a low owned pivot play in Showdown. That's okay, right? Taking him at 5%, I think, makes a lot of sense, right? He has a lot of upside. He's that sort of player, not at 20% ownership. Like, so just don't fall into that trap. That would be my main piece of advice for tomorrow, is know where the scoring comes from, right? Know where you're getting all these fantasy points, and that has to be your focus, not just the leaderboard. That would be my main piece there. Let's go over any questions down in chat, and then I'll go through some stuff. Where are we at? He got a knockdown too. Extra 10 points. So he might be optimal then. Right, second round, knockdown. I don't know what he had for significant strikes. That's pretty sweet. I'll have to double check my lineups here in a second. Thoughts on Chris Kirk? So yeah, I wasn't trying to trash my boy. Sorry about that, Doug. But I do think he's a little bit chalky. So hard to squeeze in Scotty along with the other contenders. It is. You can take Scotty and then like one of those guys in the 9K. So like Aberg or Homa, right? You can easily make that work. But if you want to try and take 3 guys up top, yeah, it can be a little bit hard, right? You cut Scotty today and done really well. I'm not sure that was a smart move for tomorrow. Yeah, same, right? I didn't play him today and it worked out for me. For tomorrow, though, placement points involved and all, might be a little bit tough. I do really like Cam Smith, though. I think he's a good chaser. He's played really well at this course on Sundays as well. One thing I'll say, guys, go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already. Obviously, you guys are asking me some questions. The only thing I ask from you is that you go out there and hit the like button. Lol, what? I could say the same thing about your comment. Not sure what that's in response to. What are my thoughts on picking Xander in like a John Rahm? So starting Rahm and then Xander as your second man in. Rahm's going to be super low ownership, teeing off earlier. So you're spot on about that. And his putting was horrible today. So I actually posted it on Twitter. You guys may have seen that over there on Twitter/X. He had gained like 4 strokes approach through his first 14 holes and had lost over 3 strokes with the short game. So the short game hasn't been there all week. It's not like it was a 1-round sample, right, where he was just not getting it done around the green and on the greens. But I think he's a decent play. I'm not playing John Rahm, but I do think he's a decent pivot. And if you started with him and Xander, that would be a pretty different start, right? Like you'd have a lot of leverage right there by taking those 2 players. Birdies is a lot more important than position points. I'll just show you guys, okay? So 1 second here. Because I don't think enough people know how the scoring works. Like, and they're playing lineups, right? So it's just crazy to me, but it's true. I get questions all the time like this. So let's go through it. So your placement points, right? The top 5 matters, right? You get 8 points for 5th. Like that's over a birdie, right? That matters. All these top 5 ones matter. First place is the equivalent of essentially like 3 birdies. So does Scotty matter? Yes, he does, right? So if he wins, even if he finishes in like 2nd or 3rd, he's getting an extra 2 birdies. And you're talking about Scotty Scheffler, right? The guy's going to make 3-4 birdies tomorrow pretty much automatically. So he's going to be a tough fade, right? That's why I mentioned that, you can still fade him, but it is a tough fade, right? Starting out there in first place. But what people overvalue are these ones, right? Like 20th place gets you 4 points. That's less than a birdie, right? 15th through 11th, right, is 5 points. That is just less than you get for a birdie, right? You look over here, you get 5.75 points for a birdie. That essentially means the difference between finishing in 10th and then finishing in 2nd is 1 birdie, right? So a whole 8 spots, right? Your elite tier placement point guys are getting the same as 10th place, right? And after that, like outside of the top 10, it is super flat, right? Like down to 30, which the guys that made the cut, I mean, there's what, like 50 something guys that made the cut, right? Are down there in only 2 fantasy points. So the difference between the guys at the true bottom of the leaderboard and then the guys in the top 10 are less than 1 birdie, right? So if any of those guys down at the bottom make more than 1 birdie, more than the guys up top, 2, 3 extra birdies, that's it right there. That books it right there. They're optimal, right? As opposed to the guys up top. So that's how easy it is, right, to go out there and catch that optimal player. And that's why I think placement points are way overrated. Even at a hard major championship, right? They matter a little bit more for the Masters because of the scoring average, but not that much. You're lapping the field with 0.1% lineups with Tom Kim. So you need him to play like Anthony Kim. Oh, that's crazy. So you have Tom Kim in like GPP winning lineups. That's insane. The rest of your lineup must be the absolute nuts. I have Tom Kim this week. I played him too, but I don't have him in my top lineups. That's for sure. He was a stinker this week. He had Kawa outright to open the week. You're saying, can you use your one time? That'd be nice, huh? That's a good take too. He wasn't even playing well. So to have the wherewithal to bet more Kawa here, that's some good stuff. Definitely wasn't something that I did. That was an oversight by me. Thoughts on Sip Straka? I like him a little bit. Now, I'm lukewarm on it because of the ownership. I think that he's playing pretty well. He fits a difficult golf course very well, right? All of his top-end finishes are almost always at courses we wouldn't consider birdie fests, and he's 14.1% owned. That's the only really downside, right, is that he's getting some attention, but he's not as chalky as a Lucas Glover. So I'm 90% sure I'm playing him, but let me double check. Again, I set my player pool before, then I build my lineups, so I need to double check that. Yeah, I have him in my player pool. So I'm taking him with that ownership, but yeah, it's more of like a lukewarm play because of that. Cantlay seems pretty efficiently priced. It doesn't appear to have ownership. You're right about that, right? I got him at about, I think, 10% ownership, maybe a little bit less. Yeah, 7% out there for Sunday Showdown. And yeah, $8,400 is cheap. Saw a 100 for Yuri. There we go. And yeah, speaking of, let me double check my lineups. Again, sorry for being a little distracted here, but we got a big old sweat going on right now. Okay. We're winning more money than before now. So that's a good sign. You have a GPP lineup with 2 players left that is in the top 50 of the GPP as well. So I have some higher scoring lineups that I've already had like 5 fighters go through. This lineup has Yuri Prohaska, Sterling, right? He scored over 100 points. Diego Lopez, 122. And Renato Moicano, he scored 115. So that is a fire-ass lineup. Now, I'm not sure if it's the best combo. Yeah, there are a few combos that have me beat that still have 2 guys left, but hopefully our last 2 can be the absolute nuts. So who are those? It was Alex Pereira as one of them, and then Bo Nickel. Oh, I trust Bo Nickel. I think he's going to post a real good score. We're going to need Alex Pereira to do his thing, go out there and get a knockout. Best value. So if you're going to take somebody with ownership, I don't hate Patrick Reed. I think he's got a real good price tag. I think with the course history, you can't go wrong. If you need to get some leverage, or you need to be a little bit more different about it, I don't know if Sahith would be cheap enough, but like Sahith Theegala, right? Like one of these guys like Tony Finau or Sahith that are a legit like elite tier golfer at no ownership. That would be the ways I go about it. Scotty showing no putting improvement this week is a red flag. He's putted pretty well. I mean, the shots gained metrics, they might be pretty average, but he's putting pretty well to the eye test. Who to pick for birdies tomorrow on Underdog? It's a good question. We'll have to take a look. I'm not sure yet. Thank you for explaining that. Seems like Scotty's going to be chalk. He absolutely is going to be chalk. Yeah, 50% owned. So as about as chalky as it's going to get. Who am I expecting to pull a close to 9 birdies like last week? Oh boy, close to 9 birdies? I don't really know what you're asking. You're going to have to clarify that one for me, man. I'm not sure what you're going with. What are my thoughts on picking these 8,000s like Fleetwood and Cam Smith instead of Scotty? I think that's a way to go about it, right? If you fade the top end of the board, you don't have to take a Rory, a John Rahm as a pivot. You could always be a little bit more balanced about it, right? So you could start with like a Homa or an Aberg, or start with a Bryson, somebody up there in that 9K range, and then live in the 8Ks, right? Because you got Cam Young, Cam Smith, Colin, right? You got Tommy Fleetwood, who's up there towards the top. And then all this top end of the 8K range too. So I think you could change up your lineup construction. I'm not sure how sneaky it's going to be, but since 50% of lineups are going to start with Scotty, right? If you wanted to be a little bit more chalky about it, kind of like I was mentioning before, just hammer some of the chalk up here in the 8 and 7Ks, right? Like you could probably take 4 players up there that are starting in the top 20 and then take your 2 pivots down low. Now, it's a little bit chalky, right? Starting with 4 guys, they're going to be like 20% owned. But because you're getting different with the lineup construction, right, where you're spending your salary, as long as your 2 pivots down low are true pivots, right, sub 5% owned sort of players, the added bonus of getting different with lineup construction might be enough to get you different enough, might give you that leverage that you're looking for. So I kind of like that idea, especially if you really want to take that like 7K chalk, like the top end of the 7s. I'm talking like the Hoygards, the Cam Davises, for example. That's probably the only way you can do it, right? Because you wouldn't want to play Scotty and then drop down to guys like Hoygaard and Cam Davis. That is about as chalky as you can possibly get. And that's like the one type of build that I would avoid, right? Is Scotty and then some of that 7K chalk. It's not like it's impossible to hit. It's just a real tough one when it comes to leverage. Thoughts on using guys who played well here last year in round 4? I think that's an okay strategy. Now, do I think that one round really matters? Right? No, right? It's just a Sunday, right, from 2023. But I wouldn't be against guys that played well. Like I'm playing Phil, for example. Any other low-owned contrarian plays? See, I'll give you 1 or 2 more. Why not? So I pointed out a lot of them in the pool. I have to be honest. I'm not playing like, 15, 20 contrarian plays, right? So I'm playing a lot of the ones that we pointed out here. But let me bring up my other tab and I can let you know. Because I tried to point out the ones I liked the most. So I tried to do that there. Let's see what else we're working with, though. Adam Scott would be one. Jason Day, I know I mentioned him a little bit, though. And then Ricky Fowler would be another one, too. So all those guys are super low owned. And if you're looking for like those last 2 as pivots, they'd be good options for that. How many would I consider in a player pool? Depends on how many lineups you're entering. So if you're entering 150, probably closer to 30 players like I have, right? 25 to 30. If you're only entering 10 lineups, then maybe it only is like 10, maybe 11 players that you're using. So all depends on the amount of lineups that you're going with. So if you have a number in mind, just let me know and I'll give you an idea. Thank you, Emmett. You said you the man. No, you're the man out there. Appreciate you tuning in. You're a little confused. Who are the best players to use with Scotty for leverage? So if you're going to use anyone with Scotty for leverage, right, it depends on who you want to pair with them, right? If you're going to take a chalky guy in the 9K range, then you should probably be taking a pivot down here in the 8Ks. If you're taking a chalky Scotty Scheffler, but differentiating right up here in the 9Ks, then maybe you can take a chalky guy in the 8K. So really anywhere across the board, just lower round guys. There doesn't have to be specific guys that you're getting to. Zalatoris ownership. So you got it over here on the tab here, but I've got him at 2.6% when it comes to his ownership. So essentially unowned, kind of like Hideki. I've got him at about 3%. Joaquin Neiman, 3.3%. Brooks Koepka's 2.8% owned. And John Rahm, I know somebody asked about him before. He's only 4% owned. So, I'm partial to Rory, right, because of his course history. It's why I like, Patrick Reed. It's why I like Phil Mickelson, right, out there for Sunday Showdown. But all of these sort of players are unowned. So, yeah, I know we just had the question about the pivots. That they would work as well, and Zalatoris included. Hideki seems like a great pick. He was a great pick for today. So, yeah, it worked out for Showdown if you played him today. But, yeah, you could run it back. Another past champion, right? A player with good course history. You could definitely convince me to take that. Let's go ahead, bring up our lineup construction section, and then we're going to talk through some props afterwards. So if you have any DFS questions, now's the time to get to it because we're going to be talking props here in just a minute or so. I got to get up the stream for the pay-per-view. So 1 second here while I get that done. And I'm not going to pay for the pay-per-view while we're on here. So I may or may not be logging onto my VPN and finding another way to watch it. So give me a second here while I do that. Let's see if there's any questions. If you have any questions, just quick fire them down in chat so I can answer them while I'm getting this stream pulled up. It'll be something easy that I can do over here. But yeah, we're going to talk through GPP lineup construction, cash lineups, just what you should be thinking about when building lineups. Because for Sunday Showdown, it's even more involved, right, than rounds 2 and 3, right? Rounds 2 and 3, we got to take game theory pivots, right? Maybe we have to force in a different lineup construction. But for Sunday Showdown, we have to think about placement points. We got to try and find some chasers. It's a little bit more involved. So I'm going to make sure we can, touch on all of that for you guys there. Come on. This stream needs to start working. It's I'll just go to a different one then, huh? Oh, there we go. I have like 5 of these that I can use. Oh, look at that. So the first fight for this, the main card, who is that, by the way? Anyone that's watching UFC? I don't even know off the top of my head. Hopefully this one, oh, could not play video. Okay. All right. We'll do that later. We'll just make this stream a little bit quicker so I don't miss too much of that stuff. And I just want to double check who the next fight is too, because it's getting close down to it. I already told you guys, I have some top 50 lineups with like 2 fighters left. That is hype stuff out here on this Saturday evening. So first fight is the Bo Nickel fight. I need him to go off and kick Brundage's ass. So we'll see. He's chalk. So I know there's probably some people out there counter sweating it, right, that probably want him to get a decision win or something like that. I need him to absolutely go off. Like I need 150 fantasy points. I need him to just nuke this slate. That would be the music to my ears, to say the very least. Okay, so let's talk through this lineup construction. So kind of like I said for rounds 2 and round 3, you have to have a plan when building your lineups. And for Sunday Showdown lineups, I'd recommend even more building them by hand, so that you can have as much control over your lineup construction as possible. Now, if you have a really good optimizer, if you're really good at setting roles out there on whatever tool that you're using, you can make this a little bit easier, right? Especially if you're entering 150 lineups like I am. But just for the sake of a lot of you out there that aren't going to be doing this on an optimizer, let's talk through what you should be thinking through. So when I'm going through and building a lineup, I'm going to try and figure out where I'm going to get different, right? So is this a lineup where I'm going to take Scotty, or is this a lineup where I'm going to be fading Scotty Scheffler? So if I'm taking Scotty up top, like I mentioned, you've got to find a range to get different in. And for me, a lot of that's going to be that 7K range, maybe the 8K range where I'm getting a little bit different. So if I want to go in here and mix in, a Max Homa, or maybe go a little bit cheaper and take a Ludwig Aberg, that's totally fine, right? Because I know ahead of time that even if I take some chalk up here towards the top, then I'm going to have the rest of my lineup to differentiate with. So what we're going to do now is mix in a little bit of a pivot down here in the 8Ks. So Sahith Theegala, 7,900. So actually just into the 7Ks is going to be our next man in. Now, because we did take 2 spend ups, our salary is getting a little bit low here. So this is where we can go down here and throw in, a Ricky Fowler, for example, get another pivot, right? So we have Sahith as a pivot, sub 5% owned Ricky Fowler. And now we've offset a lot of that ownership up top. And now at our last 2 spots is where, a lot of your personal strategy is going to come in, right? A lot of your just style, right? When building lineups is going to come in. Now, a lot of you out there will probably be very tempted to take like a Lucas Glover here, right? We're at $7,000 remaining on average, and you could fit in a Lucas Glover at $7,000, right? He's exactly at that number, but remember, he's like 20% owned, right? He's the chalk down low. Why not take a slightly lower owned Sepp Straka, right? And then for your last man in, I would not take Lucas Glover, because that would put you at, it'd only be 3 super chalky guys, so you could get away with it. But for Sunday Showdown, I don't hate the idea of taking another pivot. Like, I'm a lot more aggressive than most of you out there, right? So I will take 4 contrarian plays out there for a Sunday Showdown lineup. But even if you did finish this with Lucas Glover, you'd probably be fine for the large field GPP. Now, you have 2 sub 5% guys, right? Straka's low enough owned that you can kind of consider him a pivot. If you maybe took a slightly cheaper play than Straka, like let's say you went from Straka and took JT Poston instead, obviously a little bit lower ownership on JT Poston as compared to what you have with Straka. But on top of that, we have $200 left on the table, right? So I know we had that question about leaving salary on the table. If I'm going to take 3 chalky guys like this lineup would have, then I would be a lot more likely to leave that salary on the table. So if you're starting with Scotty, it kind of screws you with your salary, right? It kind of has that negative to it. But on top of that, it also screws with you when you're coming from the game theory. If you're fading Scotty, in my opinion, it's a lot easier to build lineups. It's not just salary, but it's also game theory. So if we're starting down here with like a Max Homa as our first man in, and I think Xander's a good first man in too, right? $9,900. I think he's in a really good spot to move up that leaderboard. If you were to start with him, who's a little bit more contrarian than a Scotty, right? Down here in the 8Ks, maybe you do take a little bit more of a chalky Morikawa, right? Maybe rather than taking that spend up guy that's going to be 40, 50% owned, you take a 30, 35% owned Colin Morikawa. So, if you're going to take chalk, which you're going to have to for Sunday Showdown, just make sure you're being intentional about where you're taking it, right? And where you're going to get different. So here in the 8K range, we have a little bit more salary to spend. So, just for the sake of this, we're going to add another chalky guy, right, in Matt Fitzpatrick, just to show you how you'd build this lineup. I don't love Matty Fitz for tomorrow. Just want to get that out there. But, somebody you could afford to take here, you throw Tony Finau into this lineup. So now we have, what is this, like 3 decently chalky plays, 1 true pivot. Now we want 2 more pivots. So, Patrick Reed, maybe average ownership. getting close to a pivot, right, at that sort of number. Your last man in should definitely be a sub 5%er. So, a Terrell Hanna got it like 12% ownership. He's probably not different enough for this sort of build. If we didn't take Patrick Reed before, right, so if we went a little bit more different than Patrick Reed, let's say we took like a Henley. Like Henley would be a huge pivot play, right? If we went Henley, then we could take a Terrell Hatton, right? Like we can make that 12%er work. But if you're going to take a 12%er and like a Patrick Reed here, we've got to find a spot, right, other than Tony Finau to get that sub 5%er in there. So rather than taking, Hatton, you could go to Harris English, maybe Akshay Bhatia at slightly lower ownership. The point is, right, you have your guys up top, right? Your 3, maybe even 4 chalky guys that you're taking at 15% plus ownership. And then you have this 2 intentional fades. So you can see that this was a little bit easier to put together than that Scotty Scheffler build, but both of them work, right? Just take your stands up top, take your 3 or 4 guys towards the top, maybe even 2, right? Maybe you are going to be more contrarian like I am, right? And only take like 2 guys that are starting in the top 10. Just remember, these placement points are overrated. They're only worth so much, right? The difference between like 30th and 10th place is less than a birdie, right? Just remember that it's about half a birdie difference out there from 30th out there to 10th. Don't let that completely change how you build lineups. So that's what I'll say for DFS. We'll see if there's any last second questions. If not, we're talking props. How bad is it if somebody gets a lot of bogeys on Sunday for points? It matters. So just to circle back to the scoring for you, you get negative, is it like 2 or something like that? It's we're negative 1.8. So yeah, close to 2, right? Negative 1.8 points per bogey. It matters, but the birdie points are much more important, right? Like, for example, if you have a guy that makes like 5 birdies and 5 bogeys, they're still going to score really well out there for showdown purposes, especially if they can get like a 3 birdie streak. So how do I feel about Shank? I feel like he's chalky. So I'll share my projections that he's like 20% owned. He's chalky, but it makes sense if you're pivoting up top, right? If you're not taking a Scotty up top, if you're not taking 3, 4 guys in the lineup that are already going to be 20% owned, then he's fine as the last man in, right? Like these chalky players, they have their utility, right? They have a better chance of getting placement points. But unless you're different with the rest of your build, I can't see taking him as your last man in, right? You got to get different here at some stage. And as I was just mentioning with the placement points, they're overrated, right? Like he's 20% owned. Guys like Ricky and Keegan Bradley are about 5% owned. And Adam Shank's not 4 times more likely, right, to be your optimal player. So limited upside, but I understand why you'd want to play him. Assuming round 4 will be the best conditions we've seen, that is absolutely true. So just to show you the weather forecast here real quickly, it's the calmest that we've seen all week, and the temperatures are pretty moderate too. In the morning, essentially no wind. In the afternoon, close to like 10 miles an hour of sustained winds. How do I feel? How do I find out what other people are picking so you can diversify? Look at the ownership projections. So that's what I do with my projections. It takes a lot of time. I've had to put in a lot of effort and research, right, into going out there and getting my algorithm set, but just get good ownership projections that you can trust, right? Whether it's over there on my Patreon page, which of course, right, is where I post all this content that I'm using over here in the live streams, or do it yourself, right? Learn how to do some algorithms, some models. Actually, I have a book that's a best-selling book over there on Amazon that goes over how to model for PGA DFS. It goes over how to model for a variety of different sports. You can do it yourself. It's not impossible. I try to make it as accessible as possible out there with the book that I wrote. But yeah, ownership projections, right? You don't have to do it yourself. You can always just get them from somebody like myself. You didn't realize the percentage points meant less birdies and more eagles. Not sure what you mean about that. Todd says, am I concerned about guys packing it in way back? Absolutely. That's always a concern, right? There's a reason why somebody like Tony Finau, a Sahith Theegala is 4% owned, right? They don't have the form and they're inherently a lot more risky. When you're playing guys like that, you just have to know that. You have to know that they have that risk, and you have to be okay if they go out there and they have that stinker round, right? There's a reason why they're lower owned, and there's a reason why people aren't going to get to them. So yes, am I concerned about it? But is that going to stop me? Absolutely not, right? It's the optimal way to play PGA DFS, and you have to have that mindset before, or else you're going to be miserable with it, right? You're going to have a lot of those guys that do blow up, but that is inevitable, right? But it is inevitable that a few of them are going to go low, that's for sure. Sorry you're late. That is all good. But when I get to prize picks, or early, you said, actually, I see what you're saying now. When we get to prize picks, let me know what I think about Hideki over bogeys and Rahm over bogeys. Yeah, I'll take a look. Absolutely. Bryson, 324 driving distance this week, higher than the leader on tour. Yeah, a lot of that's based on golf course too, right? You get a lot of extra rollouts out there at Augusta. It's a lot of firmer of a golf course than what you have. So the driving distance stuff, yeah, it can be a little bit misleading. He's not longer than Cameron Champ. He's not longer than Jake Knapp, frankly, right? Bryson hits the ball a long way, but there are guys on tour that hit it further, that's for sure. They have higher club head speeds too. Do I have any sweats on my main PGA GPP? Yeah, I have some sweats. Now, nothing in like the top 20 right now, but yeah, I have some top 200 or so lineups. Pavon, a good sneaky play. I don't know if I'd call him sneaky because he is going to get some ownership. So I know that he's like 1 over par, but I've gotten him at 15% ownership. So I don't know if I call him sneaky, but I think he's a good play. You're surprised not a lot of people are picking Hideki. I guess that makes sense. What is the ownership for Corey Connors? So Corey Connors, I've got at 6.1%. A lot of that because he's too expensive. Like if he was a $7,500 Corey Connors, like he probably should be, I'd probably have him closer to like 10%. But yeah, 6.1%, which frankly isn't that bad. All right, let's talk about some props. So I have all these stat averages calculated, and I want to get to watching these UFC fights, which I don't have up. Speaking of, let me see if I can get this stream to work because I really don't want to miss this first fight. It's important for my fantasy scoring, and I don't want to know from someone telling me down in chat. I don't want that to be the way that I know that Bo Nickel gets like knocked out or some shit. Because then I'll just get pissed. So give me a second here while I do this. But you guys can see the stat averages on the page. I'm not going to read them out, but you can see there, right? Scoring average was 2.3 over par. Birdie average, a little bit lower than we're used to seeing. Bogey average went up out there for round 3. So tough conditions, right? Obviously, you could have told that from the eye test. You probably would have known that was playing a little bit more difficult, but the stat averages bear that out too. If you guys were just here for DFS, go ahead and smash that like button on the way out of here and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the content to come. We don't just do this for the Masters. We obviously cover all of this out there for every tournament of the year. So obviously, what is it next week? RBC Heritage. We have a signature event next week. So if you guys want to make sure you don't miss any of that content, subscribe and again, smash that like button. I would like to get us over 100 likes here on the live stream before we hop on out of here. So go ahead, pump those numbers up, and it's all I ask from you, right? You ask all your questions. The only thing I ask that you smash that like button for me. Bo fight starting. Oh boy. Those like CAPTCHA things where you have to like click on the cars in the picture to get something to work? It's making me click CAPTCHA shit over here to try and get this live stream up. Like, come on, like let's just work for once. Let's not make us run through hoops to try and figure this out. Oh God. I've never heard of any of these sites. I'm on a site that's like giving me different live streams. I've never heard of any of these. That does not sound like a good thing. God damn, it's still not loading. Homo looks focused. He does. And I really liked what he was saying afterwards. Yeah, we're deleting that comment. Guy threw his like code over there for prize picks down there in the chat. Yeah, not the place for it, boss. I'll just say that. You're not banned or anything, but definitely not the place for it. Okay, so we got the fight up. We're good. It looks like he's all over Brundage. He's just like manhandling him out there. Okay, love to see that. And in terms of what I'm looking at for props, guys, if you're going to take unders on players, I would ideally like to do that with morning guys. But here's the issue I have, right? Somebody just asked, am I worried about the guys way back packing it in? For DFS, not so much, right? Like we're taking on that risk. They're low owned, right? We're not taking them in all our lineups. I'll take that risk on players in like 15, 20% of my lineups. On a 50-50 prop format, I care a lot more about that, right? Because, we're going after 50-50 props, and the guys further back are playing worse golf, right? They're not in nearly the same sort of form. So though they're in better conditions, I'm a little hesitant to go out there and bet some of the early guys. So, in theory, we'd want to be targeting some of those players for some unders on strokes, maybe overs on birdies, but I'm a little bit more hesitant than normal to do so. So what I'm going to try and do is I think the sweet spot would be like the middle of the day tee times. So if you're starting towards like 10, maybe 11 a.m. Eastern, if you're in that part of the tee time schedule, you're not playing great, but you're not playing horribly, right? Like the guys like 11, 12 over par, and you are going to get a slight advantage when it comes to the weather. So like, for example, Brooks, I think is in that part of the tee times. You have guys like Minwoo there, Jason Day, for example. The issue, right, is that Jason Day, Tom Kim are having horrible weeks. Like, I mean, they're ejected. They're not finishing in the top 10, top 20 of this event. In DFS, right, a few of these guys are going to go off. They still have upside. It's just in the 50-50 kind of format. It's tough for me to trust a lot of those players. So one of my buddies, he actually was down here in chat, T. Swenny, was saying before that he was going to take some unders on strokes early. totally agree with that sentiment. I do think the conditions will be easier. It's just, I think you have to be very selective about who you take. So I think the guys he took were all pretty decent players. They were all like, I think one of them was like Tony Finau. Like, I totally understand like taking that under, but if it's not like a Tony Finau or a Sahith that I really trust, like, for example, a Tom Kim or like a Phil Mickelson, for example, wouldn't be the type of player that I'd be trusting. So yeah, we still got a Nickel absolutely just suffocating Cody Brundage over there. So hopefully that comes through. But that's the idea for props. Is it's a little bit more tricky than I think people think. Right? Conditions will be easier out there for Sunday, but what I don't want people to forget is that this is Augusta National. This is a course that is extremely firm and fast, and even without wind, it is still going to play over par, right? Your scoring average is probably at least still 1 over, if not close to 2 over par again. You got to remember, pin locations are going to be much harder out there for Sunday as well. And on top of that, you're going to have the crunchiest, fastest greens that we've had the entire tournament. So just checking over here on masters.com to see if they have the pin sheet. It doesn't look like you have it quite yet. But when we get that, right, don't be surprised if they're super difficult. So though the weather conditions will be a positive, it's going to be offset a bit by some of those pin locations. So I do think the earlier guys are going to get the better half of it, but I'm not 100% certain that I love like taking unders on strokes or overs on birdies. It feels like it could be a bit of a trap because of the lack of interest with those sort of players. So the middle of the tee times where I think it's probably the best. I mean, even guys at the top, I don't necessarily hate for unders. This is a major championship. They're going to have to play conservative, right, to go out there and hold their position. And, you know, an even par position, right? If we needed them to shoot 3 under, I don't want my players to be conservative. But they have these guys at like 0.5 under par or even par projections. So a conservative mindset is not the worst idea. And like, for example, if Scotty shoots 2 under par, he probably wins this golf tournament, right? So like, that's not even the worst lean in my opinion, because he's going to play for that score. Like, I'm sure if he wakes up tomorrow and he shoots like -2, he's going to feel thrilled about that. So let me bring up DraftKings. I want to do a little bit of a line comparison to see where they have guys like Scotty Scheffler. So let's bring up the Masters. Just do that real quick. My boy Brundage looks absolutely winded over there in the corner. So good stuff. Bo Nickel, just keep laying on him. I wish he would have had that first round finish. That would have been nice, but maybe we'll just get a ton of control time, a bunch of takedowns and whatnot. And speaking of, I want to look at his round 1 stats. How did he do? He got 2 takedowns and then just control time. Okay, we're going to need a finish, and we're going to need some punches thrown in. That's for sure. I need him to actually get more fantasy score, because that's not going to get it done. So they do have the props posted here, so we can double check on these. And so they have Scotty at 70.5, but juiced over. Okay, that's a little bit annoying. I was hoping he'd be juiced towards the under, obviously. Guys like Max Homa at 72.5, juiced under. I agree with that. Aberg at 71.5 and even money. That seems to make a little bit of sense. Let's see where they have these guys. So they have Homa an entire stroke lower. They have Aberg an entire half a stroke lower. So at least compared to the sports books, there's not a lot of value over here on Underdog. So like I said, if we were going to take like any unders, it would be guys at like even par or maybe like a 72.5 projection. And Underdog isn't giving us those kind of prices, right? They're pricing these guys a little bit lower, which probably means that we can take a look at fades. So the pricing gets a little bit better, right, the further down the board that we go. So you have guys like Joaquin at 72, Hans at 72.5. I guess just for comparison's sake, what is Terrell Hannon at for a projection? Terrell Han's at 72.5, so at that same number, but juiced -145. So yeah, these middle of the pack guys, which aren't playing as well, right, but do have solid conditions, look like the only spots that we can really take, right? Because I'm not going to trust those guys that are like +11 at this stage, but I also am not going to take guys that are a terrible line, like 72, 71.5 strokes, like we have for some of the guys down there. So I'm going to throw in maybe P. Reed as a lean. Let me see where they have Patrick Reed in terms of pricing. So Patrick Reed is the same thing. He's -135. So not quite as much juice as what we have with Terrell Hatton, but still juice towards the under. Who else could we take? Sal Torres, 72.5. Neiman, yeah, probably not. What do they have Ricky at? Ricky's really not playing poorly this week. He's playing a lot better than people give him credit for. Yeah, they have him at 72.5. Juiced a little bit over, but an entire stroke discrepancy. The conditions will be better, right? That's, I guess, the only saving grace here. But this is not my favorite prop board. I'll be the first to say it. I'll be completely transparent about it. I don't love this prop board, especially for some of these unders. Like, I think they make some sense, right? These three props, but they're definitely not screaming like tons of value to me. So I'm curious where Prize Picks has things. So 1 second while I double check that. They do have a board posted, so it's good to have that to compare to. They have Scotty at 70.5, so that is the same. And their strokes might actually be even lower than what they have over there on Underdog. So not with the case of Aberg. Aberg is 71.5, so he's 0.5 higher. But guys like Zalatoris are 0.5 lower over there. Terrell Hatton is 0.5 lower. Patrick Reed is an entire stroke lower over there on Prize Picks. So yeah, Prize Picks has even worse lines, in my opinion, than what we have over here in Underdog. So yeah, neither of these boards, at least if you're going to take positive stances, but like unders on strokes or overs on birdies, are my favorite. So I'm going to leave the Patrick Reed one in here. I don't know if I can trust Ricky. What do they have Ricky at on Prize Picks? I'll at least do a comparison. I'm assuming like 72.5. Yeah. So they have him down at 72.5. And then Terrell Hatton was down there at 72 strokes. So I'll have to see. Yeah, I guess Underdog is the better value between the two sites, but I don't love the value in general. Oh, Bo Nickel, another takedown. You love to see it. These 2.5 bogey lines seem juicy. Yeah, you mentioned that before. Thank you for reminding me. You are right. Absolutely, you are, because there was a 4 bogey average, and I know the winds are supposed to be lower, but it's going to be baked out by the afternoon. The greens are going to be running real fast. You also have a lot of these firm and fast greens. So let's see what we have. So 2.5 for Scotty, I would not fade, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to keep the Patrick Reed one in there, and let's try and make sure we can get over a 3x payout here. So Morikawa, they have at 2.5. I hate to say it. I kind of want to fade him. Aberg at 2.5. Bryson, they have at 3.5 bogeys. Oh, wow. They're disrespecting my boy Bryson. This is a slip I'm going to go ahead and enter right now. So what I'm doing here is we're getting a little bit over a 3x payout. The reason why I chose these two in particular to take on Underdog is, first off, you have the stroke discrepancy compared to Prize Picks. Also, right, the juice under over here on the DraftKings odds. And then Colin Morikawa at 2.5 bogeys. Like I mentioned, and maybe I'm picking on him and I shouldn't be, but he's a multiple-time major champion. So it feels a little bit unfair, but he chokes all the time on Sundays. I mean, it is more than a theme at this point, right? I'm talking Century Tournament of Champions, right? Loses like a 7-stroke lead to John Rahm out there. A lot of other events that he's competed in over the last year or so, gotten into contention. He has not even come close out there on Sunday. So he got the one win over there at Zozo. So obviously that bucked the trend. I'm a little bit worried about Colin Morikawa Sunday. So I'm going to take the over, right, with the field average at 4.4 bogeys per round. I mean, he could have a well better than average day, right? Make 3 bogeys. That's almost an entire bogey and a half, right? Lower than the average. And he would still go over that projection. So again, even with the easier wind conditions, Sunday pin locations are going to make it pretty tough out there, especially if you're later starters like Morikawa that are going to be playing with the firmest and fastest screens of the entire day. So like those two. And I kind of want to take Ricky, but I'm also a little bit sketched out by the form with Ricky. I'm not going to lie. Terrell Hatton, he hates this golf course. That's the only reason I would be a little hesitant there. So maybe we take him out, but let's see what we can find for those bogey props. That Morikawa over that's really solid value. He should be at 3.5 bogeys, or at the very least 3 bogeys, but probably 3.5. They have Cam Smith at 2.5. He's an elite tier bogey avoider. So I'm not sure if I would be as thrilled about that one. They have Cam Young at 3 bogeys. That is, if he was at 2.5, I would definitely be considering the over. And then a lot of these mid-tier players, they have it like 3.5, 2.5 for Rory McIlroy, who is probably going sun running on Sunday. So we should probably avoid fading him. Did they just bump down Ricky? That would make a lot of sense if they did, right? It was an entire stroke discrepancy compared to the books. Yeah, so see, yeah, they bumped him down. So we can't even take him if we wanted to out there as a prop. So let's see what we can find for some value. Tiger Woods, he's such an X factor because of that health. I mean, he could be great tomorrow. He could be horrible tomorrow. So I would probably stay away from that one. Now, something you can do with Tiger Woods is they keep live props on here, like for the back nine, for example, or even hole props that they'll keep posted throughout the day. If Tiger Woods wakes up tomorrow and looks nasty, looks horrible, then fade him for one of those live props right there for his second 9 or for a stretch of 3 holes towards the end of his round. If he looks really good, right, then maybe you take the opposite side of that. So you could take a look at that. Brooks not being on any of the featured groups is a disgrace. 5-time major champ in the best game other than Tiger. I agree with that. I have no disagreement with that argument whatsoever. With guys out of contention, do I prefer birdie props instead of strokes? I do. Yes. For guys that are especially starting super early in the morning, absolutely. Over 80 degrees tomorrow afternoon is going to get crispy. Is it 80 degrees? Yo, yeah, it is. You're right. Now it's a little bit cloudy. So if it is cloudy, I think that'll help them out a little bit. But yeah, 80 degrees, you are 100% right. It is going to get crispy in that afternoon. Brooks never took the clubs out of his car. This guy's clearly a live hater, but hey, that's your prerogative, right? Hit the like button, you bums. Absolutely. Guys, let's get over 100 likes. Get those numbers up. That's weak stuff that we have out there right now. You can see Cam Smith going real low tomorrow. Me too. It's what he did Saturday last year, went super low and got into contention. Yeah, saw that. We're going to go through the prize pick stuff here soon. Don't sleep on the NASCAR board if you need to get an offset payout shift. Gibbs better than 11.5 and Bell better than 10.5. Well, if there's anyone that I would trust for that, it's my boy T. Swenny. He's really good at NASCAR. He actually watches all the races and does projections for it too. So that's how you know he does it. They have the 2.5 bogeys out there. So yeah, if for example, if Cam Young raised at 2.5 bogeys, I know you mentioned that one before. I would take his over, right? Colin Morikawa, I also think they'll probably have him at 2.5 bogeys. I would take his over for the pick 6 format too. So I'm with you on that. He got a sub. Oh shit! What do you get for a score now? Oh, now I got to double check. 108 points. So, I mean, he did get the second round sub, so that's huge. He got it in the second rather than the third, but only 3 takedowns and only 8 significant strikes. I'm slightly disappointed. Let me say that much, especially because he didn't outscore the main person I needed him to. I needed him to outscore that Kayla Harrison chick to have like the True Nuts lineup, and he came 3 points short. So, all right, well, we're probably not going to win the GPP is what that means, but we can still easily cash out for a lot of profit. So hopefully our guys finish strong. I guess I still have a few guys that are live. Let me see who else it would be. Gaethje and then a Jamal Hill lineup. So I guess in theory, if Gaethje and Jamal Hill were to go off, could have lineups that beat it. But yeah, that's a little disappointing. If he scored 4 more fantasy points, which what is that? It's like 20 strikes that he could have had. I would have been in the prime position, that's for sure. Cam Smith is the best putter in the world. He is, absolutely is. And he's one of the best short games in the world, that's for sure. Rory at 2.5. I think it's an okay play. I prefer like the Morikawa one, also the Cam Young one, but yeah, I would lean over on it. Let's clean up tomorrow. Absolutely, Francis. You know it. Rahm, Rory, Cam Young, Hideki. Sign me up. And especially Hideki, that early starter. You know, we just had the question about potentially taking guys for like birdies as opposed to taking them for strokes that are starting early. I think that you could fade bogeys for the early guys. That's another way to handle that. Scotty hit the same number of greens as Vijay Singh. Holy shit. Vijay Singh is still striping it at his age. It's impressive stuff. 108, not good. That's what I'm saying. He's like 4 points short of where I needed him. That's for sure. I think it's good value too, man. There's no worries at all. Don't worry. Fleetwood at 3.5 bogeys. So tempted to crush the under. So a 3.5, right? I think you could make an argument for taking the under, but with the average at like 4 bogeys, I mean, even on the easy days, it's been like 3.8 bogeys per round. I don't know if it's a smash play, right? But I do understand why you'd say that. That's for sure. Let me bring up prize picks. We'll go through that real quickly. Obviously, just entered that slip on Underdog and going to give you guys a little bit of value here. So let's figure out what we're going to do. I already told you guys the strokes board is a little bit lower than what we have on prize picks. And an Underdog, I should say. My apologies for misspeaking. And these birdies are really high. I do not agree with this at all. So what they're doing here, guys, and this is both websites, and don't fall for this today, okay? They're posting all these guys at like way inflated stuff because of the weather conditions, right? They know that people out there doing the research are going to see no wind and think that it's going to play as an easy golf course. Remember that this is the Masters. It's a major championship. It's going to be firm and fast by the time it gets to the afternoon. It is not an easy golf course. To have all these guys at 4 bogeys is ridiculous. I mean, this is eye-opening shit, especially like having some of the early starters that just aren't even in it over there at like 4 birdies. These strokes lines are too low too. So prize picks is going to be almost all fades for birdies and strokes, right? I already like fades over there in Underdog, right? We took that over on bogeys on Colin Morikawa. But let me look at these greens. So yeah, the greens, they have like way too high. Oh my. So yeah, they're definitely trying to take advantage of people a little bit here, right? So what they're doing is they're hoping that people are going to overreact, right, to the change in weather, but we're still going to have a really baked out golf course. So yeah, prize picks, it's going to be hard to get like a 3x payout on any of these, but it's definitely a fade value for sure. So just to try and find something to put together, I don't hate some of these unders on greens and regulation. So, like an Adam Shank, for example, like I love you to death, Adam, but you're not an elite tier green regulation guy. And the average for greens and reg, right, just to go back to that, was 10.27 per round, right? So it is more than a green lower. And you're talking about somebody with Sunday pin locations, which will also be a little bit tougher. Sure, better wind conditions, but yeah, that feels like a pretty easy under to me. So I'm going to throw that in there. Bryson, we could fade, right? He's not the best iron player. Same thing with Hogard. A little bit erratic when it comes to his iron play. But even these guys at 12.5, like I know it's Rory, I know it's John Rahm, right? John Rahm, Rory, right? Some of your best players in the world, but they're over 2 greens higher than the field, which frankly is, I think, is a mistake. Let me see how Cantlay has hit the ball so far. I'm genuinely curious on that. So 1 second. I want to see how many greens in reg he has for the week, like what his average is. Should be easy enough to find here. So just 1 second. Why am I getting spammed? My buddies want to play video games. They're spamming me right now. Come on. Just wait until I'm done streaming, and then we can talk after. If you're watching this, Ian, just give me a few minutes. We're almost done here. Greens and reg, we went 10, 10, and then 10 for Patrick Cantlay. And I know, right, conditions are going to be a little bit easier for Sunday. Like even he would be somebody that we'd be taking for an under. So I'm going to go ahead and take Adam Shank for now out there in this slip, but I think there are probably quite a few unders that we could take on greens and reg. Reason why I don't want to take these two together is you only get a 2.5x payout, which is just far too trash for my liking. These fairway props, the average for fairways was just over 10 today. Fairway average isn't affected very much by wind. It's affected a little bit, right? Like any stat out there, but not nearly as much as what you have for greens and reg. So if we're going to find a fade, I think these greens and reg props are some of the better ones. Speaking of looking at the stats, I do want to take a look at how Adam Shank has done in greens and reg. I'm assuming that he's kind of like Cantlay, probably went under in at least 2 of his 3 rounds, if not all 3 of them. So let's circle back on that one now. You add Adam Shank. I hate that they have these highlights automatically playing in the background. It's definitely a little bit annoying. So he's actually gone 12, 11, and 13. So Adam Shank has had a really good reading regulation week. So kind of like they're trying to trap these people, right? A lot of people just with the weather, right? By posting lines that are too low, right? They're trying to get the box score watchers out there with Adam Shank. So I'm still going to fade him because of that. But yeah, he's done a lot better on greens and reg than I would have expected before we go out there and check that. So we have that. What would an under on birdies pay? Is that still 2.5x? Yeah, that's bullshit. So we are going to have to try and find a positive stance play. It's just prize picks might be unplayable, honestly. If they're only going to give us fade value, it's borderline unplayable. So they have these guys all at 3.5 bogeys. Guys like Willie Z's at 3. They have guys like Hideki right over there at 3 bogeys. And then a player like Scotty Scheffler is the only one they have at 2.5. So that's good to see for our underdog stuff. Right? In comparison, they definitely have this bogey board a little bit higher, but there's no value to take here. And this is, I know exactly what they're doing. They're just trying to get all these fish to go out there and take overs on birdies, unders on strokes. And they're going to print money. I can tell you for a fact that Prize Picks is going to make a lot of money for round 4 Showdown. Now, they won't be, hopefully at least, making a lot of money off of me when it comes to my props, but I can tell you for a fact, it's Sunday at the Masters. Everyone's going to be watching golf, right? That's watching sports tomorrow, that they're going to rake in a shit ton of cash out here on these props. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of their best days ever, just based on how they're pricing the board. This is how, put it this way, this is how I would price the board out here on Prize Picks, and it's not because I think they're all going to go low. It's because I know that people would still take unders. Like they're going to be like, oh, Lucas Glover to shoot even par. Oh, let's do that, right? Oh, Jason Day, he's been great at this course before. Let's take his under right out there at even par. Not looking at the sportsbook odds at all, right? That's your casual golf gambler out there. So if there's not going to be any overs that we can take, and frankly, like maybe Tiger Woods at 2.5, right, would be like the only over I would take. Maybe you do have to just take the 2 fades. So maybe you do take like a Cantlay and an Adam Shank and just take them there at 2.5x. That might be all that we have to work with. So That's what I'm going to say for the slip right now. It'd be these two out there for an unders on greens. But let's circle back to Underdog. I don't want to leave you guys hanging with just that 2.5x slip. It's just that the value, right? I'm not going to force it in. And on Underdog specifically, it's a lot better than what we have on Prize Picks. See, is that next fight starting yet? Who's the next one for UFC? Just to circle back on this. So it was the Bo Nickel fight. The next one is Oliveira versus Sarukian. I have both of them, if my memory serves me correctly, out there in my player pool. But based on like who's done well so far, I probably need Sarukian to play well. That would be my guess. I can't look at my lineups right now because we're on live stream, but that's probably where we're at. He's trying to fight the crowd. Oh boy. I'm looking forward to this fight though. This is gonna be one of the better ones. Am I sure I want to send the form again? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I'm just trying to watch the live stream, a legal streaming site. You can work here for me. Can I go through strokes on pick 6? Let me see if I can bring up the pick 6 stuff. Let me see, man. Because I'm down here in Florida. It's illegal down here, so I'm not sure if they're going to let me. But if I can, I absolutely will. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can bring it up. I got you. Here you go. So here's the pick 6 stuff. I guess it's going to make me click this bullshit. Okay, let's get it out of there. So there's the PGA Tour stuff. Their strokes, look at this. They're significantly higher, right, than what they have on Prize Picks. They have like all these guys at 73.5, maybe 0.5 higher on some of your lower tier players. And then your elite tier guys, you do have some that are posted a little bit lower, right, like 71.5. I would 100% fade Bryson DeChambeau. Like, and I like Bryson, right? Don't get me wrong, but that's just too low of a line there. Matt Fitzpatrick, the same thing. Yeah, this looks like the bottom end guys here, right? So like your top tier players, the bottom end of the board, I should say, there's quite a bit of fade value, right? Especially if you like compare to Prize Picks Underdog, you can find some value to take. The bogeys are worse, like you're saying, right? They have these guys at 2.5. Same thing, right? These bottom end of the tier guys, you could probably fade. And then birdies are better, a little bit more reasonable, right? They have a lot of these guys posted at 4 over there on Prize Picks and Underdog. And on pick 6, they're a little bit more reasonable. Speaking of, 2.5 for an Eric Cole, I would take an over on, actually, of all things. So yeah, pick 6. I wish I could enter these. I wish this was something that I could do myself or that I had experience with, but a lot of value. So I guess just we'll do this for the sake of you guys. I can't enter this. I have never played this format before, but let me give you a few props because these are decent value. That's for damn sure. So we're going to take the Morikawa over. We're going to take this Fitz over. We're going to make this a whole 6-man for you here. Why not? The bogeys are worse, right? We mentioned that one a little bit earlier. We already took the Morikawa fade, right? So we probably don't want to add that one in. Bryson, you could fade there. So that's 4 props that we have so far. Okay. You only need 4, right? You could probably just do a 4-man. I think that's possible over there. That's probably what I would go with. These are the 4 that I would like on pick 6, which again, I have never played before. The numbers are wild, but yeah, I know the payouts aren't as good. That's the one thing about that site. I know the payouts aren't great, but yeah, the numbers are wild. That's for damn sure. You have Sarukian by decision, but you can see it by sub either way. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a high-powered fight. I think it's going to be exciting, to say the least. I think Oliveira might even KO him. I could see that too. Pick 6 is really nice. That's a shame that I can't play. Yeah, they're expanding, so maybe they'll be down here in Florida, right, sooner rather than later. But yeah, they're new and improving, so hopefully they can add states. I think that's my main gripe, right, is that I just can't play them right now, right? If I could play them, I'd probably be pretty hype about it. But I do want to give you guys one more slip. Again, if you're going to play on Prize Picks, I don't hate those 2 unders on greens, but the payout's just not great. Over here on the Underdog side, though, let's see what we can work with. So ideally, I would want to fade guys. I actually think the Underdog board's a little bit sharper than what we have on Prize Picks. But let's find some PM guys that we can perhaps take a stance against. So the main things that I noticed for value on Underdog are these bogey props, right? As we were talking about a little bit before. We already faded the Colin Morikawa one. Max Homa, I'd probably fade him too at 2.5. Like, I'm rooting for him. I hope he has a good day out there tomorrow. I still like him for DFS. But reality is, he's a little bit of a choker, right, out there in major championships. So you could take that. And if we took 3 bogey props, I'm pretty sure that we can get like a 5x payout. So let me see what we can do here. Even like a 1.1x at 3 bogeys, like that's still something I'd consider for an over. 1.1x for the over. Yeah, of course it's 1.1x. Because it's at 3.5 bogeys. Like that's a crazy line. What are we doing there? One second, let me get a sip of this. My throat's starting to get to me. Again, I'm a little sick, guys, so sorry if my voice is a little bit raspy, but we're doing our best out here. Dang it. So they are going to make us fade these PM guys, that's for sure. They have all the guys at the top up there at 3.5 bogeys. 2.5 is more the number I'm looking to get to. I guess I'm just going to have to fade the guys that I really like, and it'll be a little bit of a life edge. So the main 3 pieces of value that I see right now when it comes to bogey props would probably be these 3. My least favorite would be this Cam Smith one because he is an elite tier short game player. But guys like Tommy Fleetwood, Max Homa, they are elite tier players in this field. We saw well over a 4 bogey average today, right? We're going to have Sunday pins. We're going to have a real firm and fast golf course. I'm not sure if I'm officially going to get to these 2 props, but those are probably the other 2 leans I'd give you on Underdog. Let me go ahead, bring up Hard Rock Bet. We'll take one last final look at the outright betting board and then hop on out of here. So again, guys, I appreciate all the support here on the channel as per usual. Go ahead and smash that like button for me if you haven't already. And let's finish off this live stream strong. So what I'm going to look at here, and really the only bets that I placed today were on Ludwig Aberg. So I got Aberg at 15-1, took him for a live outright bet. And that is the only outright that I've placed this week. So obviously I'm going a little bit later on exposure just because of some of the lines over here. But, trying to find value out here for Sunday is not going to be easy to come by. And in fact, I wouldn't hate betting Xander Schauffele, but 30-1 isn't close to a good enough number. He'd probably have to be at least like 75-1 for me to want to get exposure there. So depending on the books that you have access to, a few guys I would throw into that hat. Xander at something like 75-1, I would consider taking. A Bryson at like 35-1 or more is somebody that I'd consider for a little bit of a comeback on Sunday. Cam Smith, if you're getting like 150-1, I'd probably consider him for a little bit of a comeback. But the odds that they're posting over here on Hard Rock are just atrocious. I mean, they've been disrespectful the entire week. They had guys like Sanjay M posted, Sam Burns posted today that missed the cut, and we're still in their outright betting odds. So not only are they being a little bit careless with that, but they're also just posting like the worst industry numbers by far out there for some of these live bets. So at least on Hard Rock Bet, I would probably stay away, but I gave you guys a few of those target numbers. I mean, if you can find some value, maybe even on Aberg, right? He's the one guy that I have a bet on this week, right? Out there for an outright. If you can find like 15-1 out there in Aberg, then maybe you do take the plunge out there on him. Speaking of, I want to see where Draftkings has their outright board. So a little bit more realistic, like, right, Aberg is 9-1 there, right? Bryson's a much better number, right, than what you're going to get otherwise. In fact, he's 20-1 over there. You find a book that's maybe just a little bit better than some of these Draftkings numbers, and I think you're cooking with something. So obviously they have Xander at 30-1 as well. Let me check Odds Checker out, actually, because it feels like there's got to be a book out there somewhere, right, that has like a 40-1 on Xander. I mean, he's far enough back that there should be a 40-1 on him, right? If not, then these books are just getting a little bit greedy out there with their hold. But let's see what we're working with. So I've got Odds Checker up. We've got the live outright odds. So yeah, there's a 35-1 hanging on him on FanDuel out there in Xander, but everyone's just with these scam odds. And kind of like what they're doing with like Prize Picks and Underdog, they know that it's all these casuals that are playing this week, right? They know that it's people that are betting on golf for 1 week a year so that they can afford to go out there and give you real trash odds to bet on. So that is pretty much exactly what I'm expecting here. And I think why we're seeing these odds. And yeah, it's pretty trash across the board, guys. Like, I don't see really anyone that I'd take the plunge on. So live outright bet, I guess if you want to tail along with me, take Ludwig Aberg, but you're not going to get the same number that I did, unfortunately. So, hey, unless you really need some action out there for Sunday, I'd probably stay away from that. But that is all I've got here for this live stream, guys. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared out there for Sunday's action. Best of luck with any of your DFS lineups, prop bets, outright bets, whatever the case may be. And let's have ourselves a Sunday at the Masters. It's a crazy leaderboard. Pretty much anyone can win. I mean, Scotty's got to be like the huge prohibitive favorite, but if Max gets it done, that's an insane story. If Aberg wins as a first-timer, I mean, that is unprecedented, right? Winning your first start at a major, that would be insane. If we see, a Bryson win. I mean, that'd be a big one for the live bots out there, right? But I'm a big Bryson fan, so I'd be okay with seeing him win. If Cam Smith turned it around, Xander Schauffele, right, win nuclear on Sunday, pretty much whoever wins, I guess, except for Scotty. If Scotty wins, we all expect that, right? Anyone else would be an insanely good story. So obviously, I'm a little bit partial to Scotty because he's my highest owned player in DFS this week. But even if it's not Scotty, we're going to have ourselves a Sunday. So I'm looking forward to it. Enjoy all the action out there. Best of luck, like I said. And I'll see you guys for all the content at the RBC Heritage.